As you know, we are always really happy to have excellent authors and really good books here at Copperfield's Petaluma. And today we get to highlight one of the best. About 200 years ago, I'm rounding off, so forgive me, Mary Shelley wrote an amazing story and made magic happen. We are fortunate enough 200 years later to have some exceptional contemporary authors who have revisited that world and given us a new and interesting look into the world of Frankenstein with Eternal Frankenstein. Tonight we are so thrilled because we have not one, not two, but three contributors to this exceptional short story compilation, as well as its primary editor. They will be reading selections as well as discussing, I would expect, a little bit of the backstory and the book itself. So please join me in giving a warm Copperfield's welcome to the editor and head of Wordboard Publishing, Lockhart.
Thank you. It was a night a lot like this 200 years ago that inspired Mary Shelley to write Frankenstein. And I also wanted to, since Frankenstein grew out of a ghost story, there are a couple of ghosts I'd like to invite. One is a woman who was actually born on this day many years ago and is best known as the Bride of Frankenstein, the actress Elsa Lanchester. And the other is John Zachary, who is best known as the Cool Ghoul. He was a horror host. He died yesterday night at the age of 98. And so let's have them here in spirit to kind of look over the proceedings tonight. I wanted to start with a little bit from Frankenstein itself. This is the 1818 edition, the original version of Frankenstein. Mary Shelley revised it in 1831. I think this version's a little leaner and a little meaner, and this is the reanimation sequence itself. So it's chapter 4. It was a dreary night in November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils, with an anxiety that almost amounted to agony. I collected the instruments of life around me that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull, yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineated the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion. I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God, his yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was a lustrous black and flowing as teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion, his straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this, I deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and a breathless horror, disgust, filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length, I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted, surprised, I embraced her. But as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. The shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed. When, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me. But I escaped, and I rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. And that leads me to the introduction to Eternal Frankenstein. A modern Prometheus. How do you do? Well, so begins Frankenstein, the Universal Pictures film produced by Carl Laemmle Jr., directed by James Whale, and produced by Edward Van Sloan as he steps from behind a curtain, offering an aside from his role as the film's scholarly Dr. Waldman. A few words of welcome and warning to theater patrons that they are about to experience one of the strangest stories ever told. This wasn't the first time Frankenstein had appeared on screen. The first was Edison Studios' 1910 adaptation, or on stage. But even that's not where Frankenstein began. Frankenstein begins 200 years ago, during the bleak and sunless summer of 1816, when a young woman, an unwed mother on the run, shares an evening of ghost stories with friends and lovers taking refuge in a chalet in Switzerland. After passing around a copy of Phantasmagoriana, a French anthology of German ghost stories, a challenge arose. Each person in attendance would write their own tale to thrill, shock, and horrify. That night, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, later known as Mary Shelley, had a frightening dream. The dream became the seed that inspired Mary to write Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, a tale of galvanism, philosophy, and the reanimated dead, which she published anonymously in 1818. Today, Frankenstein's become a modern myth without rival. It has influenced countless works of fiction, music, and film. We all know Frankenstein, both man and monster, creator and created. We know the novel explores the great mysteries of creation, life, and death. But how much do we really know about Frankenstein? Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is many things. It's a first novel. It's a philosophical work. It's the origin of science fiction. It is a reaction to volcanic dust obscuring the sun and the apocalyptic skies that distinguish the year without a summer. It's a novel marked by the loss of a child and the desire to write something more enduring than the poetry of Lord Byron and Percy Shelley. It is a story of technology and magic and the desire to challenge gods and nature's laws. It is a tale of dreamlike geographies, shifting topographies, and finding one's place in the universe. It has the true touch of cosmic fear, wrote H.P. Lovecraft. And it is the mother to every robot, every android, every sentient computer, whether benevolent or malevolent, to come after, according to Joanna Russ. Frankenstein, like its monster, its creature, its wretch, has taken on a life of its own. It reflects us. It defines us. It shows us what it means to be human. Welcome, then, to Eternal Frankenstein, an anthology offering 16 different interpretations of the Frankenstein mythos, from 16 of my favorite authors, exploring worlds both literary and cinematic, scientific and supernatural. All will surprise you. Some will shock you. Some will terrify you. So if you scare easily, now's your chance to, well, we warned you. Welcome to the Eternal Frankenstein launch party. I'm going to be introducing some awesome authors to you. And I'd like to start with somebody, well, if you come in the store, you already know. Amber Rose Reed is, well, this is her first pro story. This is her first pro story. I've been lucky enough to be reading stuff from her for the last 3 years, and she is quite a writer with quite a future ahead of her, so I'd like to introduce to you Amber Rose Reed.
Exciting and also slightly terrifying. So my story is the first in the book. It comes from a line in Frankenstein wherein the creature bemoans the fact that while everyone else knows from who he came, he never will. So I'm going to read you Torso, Heart, Head. Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. Frankenstein. Right arm, left arm, right arm. Your left arm blocks the swing. Your right arm takes a swing of its own. Your knuckles crack against someone else's nose. When you pull back your fist, you wiggle your fingers. Old Joseph takes it as a slight and lets out a growl. He's like a mutt going for a bone. He charges again and you sidestep the cur. You didn't start this fight, but he has a face fit for slapping, and you've got fists made for hitting. He comes again. The tavern crowd around you buzzes and spits. The barmaid's calling for someone to stop the brawling. You draw back your arm, ready to deliver a punch. It'll be the last one you have to release tonight. Sure thing, that. Something crunches against the back of your head. Your vision goes black. You don't feel any pain. Torso. Your hammer hasn't met the anvil yet when you hear the screaming. Women mostly, and you pass the hammer to your apprentice and head out into the street to see what's causing the noise. Down the way, a cart's toppled over. You hear the screams as words as you get closer. There's a boy under there. And the cart is crushing him. The muck in the street sucks at your feet as you rush over. You don't trip. The crowd parts as you approach. There's none strong enough to help, save you. The wood is splintered, but you find a grip. All you can see of the boy are his small child's feet, shod in tattered shoes, and his legs bare to the knee. The muscles in your chest pull and twinge, and you feel as though all of your upper self is on fire. But the cart gives way from the mud with a sucking sound, and as the boy slides from beneath the toppled vehicle, your eyes meet his. He has a strong gaze, blue eyes meeting yours. You let go of the cart, and mud squelches beneath it. You straighten and take deep breaths, waiting for the feeling of fire to leave your chest. But it doesn't. You clutch your right hand over your heart. It feels suddenly like you are the one being crushed. Heart. Your heart flutters. You would never use that line in a poem. No, instead, your heart would open like bird's wings, drawing you up into the ether, into the glorious realm of nature that you can witness only because of her. You're Cynthia. You're Diana. You're Selene, goddess of the yellow moon above. If nature had some consideration, the moon would be full and pale, not yellow, though at least that rhymes with some words of poetic pretension. The city streets stretch out before you, empty at this hour. You had not realized you'd tarried so long in Madame Auguste's sitting room, but your beloved had been there, taming the restless spirit inside of you, and truly, you would have spent forever inside that sitting room, as though it were a space as vast as the boundless forests of Arcadia and as full of treasures as the agoras of ancient days. She had given you a note, perfumed paper folded in 3 and then again. It was the answer to your question. There was nothing else that it could be. And yet, her eyes had given no hint of the contents. Would she put you out of the misery that laced your every moment, or plunge you deeper into that black despair? Yes or no, you would receive the answer in the same place in which the question had spilled from your lips, as though drawn out by the delicate scent of that same perfume. The church rises up before you in all its splendor. a fine work of man. Its peach-colored walls hide the glories of art and the divine inside, but you cannot breach those walls tonight. Their moldings drip down toward you. In the yellow light of the moon and the gas lamps, they seem almost sinister, the arrows of fate pointing at your hat-covered head. There is no bench on which you may sit. You unfold the letter in full view of God and the church and bring it to your nose before bringing your eyes to its surface. Is it roses, her perfume? Roses and something else, indefinable, ineffable. Her words are spindly across the page, inked in India, and though the light here is not good, you read them quickly, and then again. Once more, for bad news should always come in threes, and this letter, dashing hopes against the rocks of fickle womanhood, is the worst news your frail heart could hear. You smell not roses anymore. The muck of the river calls, the pull of the current. Head. From far off, the clock tower strikes noon. You try to measure your stride to each strike, but it's not long before you're out of step. Your left foot a beat too early in its motion, your right foot stuttering a bit too late. There is no sense in your delay, you've been told over and over, but like Fabius Cunctator, you walk circles around your destination. No army follows you, only a decision, only your future. Is it for you to take your place beside your father when other pursuits call you forth? Is it for you to stand aside and let the running of all you were raised for pass to your brother, to raise the blood of your father and spur him to enmity? Your head feels heavy on your shoulders, as though it's too big for your body. It hangs low. In your pocket is a letter to your father, in response to the one he sent you, bidding you to return home. You shall not be coming home, the letter states. Your path is set for things beyond business, for Latin, for Greek, for the coins and copper pots and places in the choreographer's maps. The letter is worded more vehemently than your shaky penmanship might indicate. To open yourself up for ridicule is no easy matter, and easier in your imagination than to put down in words in black ink. Another student rushes by, his shoulders slamming against yours. His eyes are alight with some sort of madness, red-rimmed, and his face is a mask of discontent. Is he like you, caught between two desires? For a moment you imagine it so, and feel kinship despite the ache in your shoulder. Your eyes watch him as he grows more and more distant. He charges into the anatomy building with the assurance of one who holds no doubt in his actions. To be like that would be a gift, to charge forth with purpose and know where it is you were going. Your second option is to charge into a building very like the anatomy building and withdraw your enrollment in university. To pack your things and return home to your father's side. You think of the young man, possessed by some mad passion, and wonder if that frenzy could ever come upon you, could ever make your actions incisive and decisive. Why not, you wonder? Why not stride forth as the man with the burning eyes, refusing to match pace with an outside force, and instead make your own? You spin around, shoe dipping into the space between the cobblestones, tipping you, but you catch your balance and dart out into the road. Decision made. You would do it. The horses, the carriage, seem to blur in their sudden motion, so close to you, and you wonder, was that the wrong decision after all?
I know I've got a little friend here. This is Eleanor. She's my assistant. And she's really happy to see all you guys here tonight. Our next reader is somebody that I met at a science fiction convention a few years back. And I thought she was cool, and we started talking, and then I started reading her fiction. And, well, this is the third of my anthologies she has appeared in. After appearances in Shadow Fantastique and Cthulhu Fatagan, finally, Anya Martin has a story in one of my anthologies with a title you can actually pronounce. Ladies and gentlemen, out here from Atlanta, Georgia, Anya Martin.
I'm short, so I have to get this down to my height. Okay. I have a story. You've got to imagine that it's being told in the voice of Elsa Lanchester, who is the narrator, the complete narrator of The Unbride, or No Gods and Marxists. We're going to go back to 1932. The The first rule of telling a scary story is never to start with, "It was a dark and stormy night." But I don't know how else to begin. Because if there ever was a dark and stormy night, this was it. And in Los Angeles, no less. A city that almost never ever has dark and stormy nights. A place known for sunshine and moonshine, thanks to that nonsense called prohibition. Clear skies and maybe at most a layer of mist as you maneuver your jalopy around the winding curves of Mulholland Drive up into the hills toward the stars. Yes, it was a rare stormy night in Hollywood, the kind when a man might make a monster or a woman tell a tale about monster making. Charles and I were new to that scene in 1932 and renting rather lower, but still cock-pointed up, the very last house on La Brea Avenue, that little stretch called La Brea Terrace. In other words, we were shielded by enough cliff and trees that we had no worry our humble estancia would be struck, even though the thunder cracked as loud as the guns of war and lightning flashed like the neon lights of Mayfair through the silk drapes. You could scarcely get a peep out of Jimmy about his time in the trenches. That's Jimmy Well, and she's with her husband, Charles Lawton. You could scarcely get a peep out of Jimmy about his time in the trenches, but from the first martini of smuggled gin that night, he wouldn't shut up about how Junior Lamley was hammering him about making a sequel to Frankenstein. I empathized with his reluctance to be typecast as a horror director, but then who wouldn't? On the other hand, Biddy, my mother, taught me from the cot not to be surprised that money men always will pick a surefire blockbuster over art or any kind of social message. Nature at its crudest, most savage, and we, the very most refined of the London stage, Jimmy declared, with his self-taught posh accent, lifting his pinky before taking another sip of his cocktail. He paced, cigar in one hand, drink in the other, first to the window, pulling the shades to gaze out at the incessant sheets of rain, then migrated by the armchair where I sat in my green satin dressing gown, nursing my own gin and tonic, to the sofa where Charles sprawled with his legs up, his big head propped on a lacy pillow, and knackered after a day on the set of Jimmy's current feature, The Old Dark House. He surely would be snoring away if not for the clatter of the storm and Jimmy's chatter. I had to stifle a giggle at us being refined, but Jimmy had airs and ambition after his ascent from the poorest of the working stiffs. He kept his humble origins under wraps from the Americans, of course, who were Star Trek by any affectation of British nobility, as they were by any movie star. As the daughter of Edith Lanchester, socialist, suffragette, and insufferable, I wasn't going to out him for giving the finger to the upper crust. Not for that, and not for that other matter, either. I should wonder that an irate Junior Lamley, god of Universal, was aiming those arrows of lightning right at the head of James Whale, Hollywood's greatest sinner. No, I shan't supplement myself so highly. Maybe the bolts are meant for dear Charles. Box office thunderclaps for England's greatest actor come to American soil. Jimmy flicked his fingers quickly through Charles's hair, and I observed my husband twitch his neck ever so slightly, but whether from being shook out of a near nap or discomfort at sign of a possible affection in front of me, I wasn't sure. I knew I needn't worry about replacing another couch, though, because Charles was, how shall I say, delicately too hefty to attract Jimmy's more personal proclivities. "What of my Elsa?" Charles mumbled, sitting up momentarily to raise his own glass to his lips. "She is a devil," Jimmy said with a laugh, clicking his glass against Charles with such force that some drops splashed onto a fuzzy swatch of the reclining man's pale pink chest, peeking from a partially unbuttoned shirt. "You know me too well," I said with a laugh. "Come, Elsa, watch the storm with me," Jimmy said, grasping my hand now to pull me to the window. "You know how lightning bores me," I replied. nailing my bottom firmly to my seat until he laughed again and let go. At that moment, the electric lights flickered and flashed off. This house wasn't old. Nothing in LA seemed to be much more than a decade or two at most. But with no electricity, it now was most definitely dark. "Charles, darling, can you light the candles?" I asked, thinking I'd probably have to do it myself. But Jimmy jumped to it, igniting the 5 candles in the candelabra above the fireplace with his cigar, and then carrying it over to the coffee table. "Hardly ever rains in Hollywood, and you know I'm weary of Frankenstein," Jimmy said, turning back towards me. "And yet I cannot help but think of another stormy night when 3 gathered, a man and a couple. Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and his wife Mary Shelley, to weave weird tales, and how the most blood-curdling and creepy of all those stories was penned by that lovely, gentle, pretty young woman. How utterly astonishing. Unlike Elsa, of course, who will tell you to your face what she thinks and never worries about anyone's feelings," Charles said. "She's actually quite nice inside, though." Even in the shadowy light of candles and lightning flashes, I could see he was sitting now. The opportunity to tease me had perked him up. "So you both think I wouldn't tell a story of monsters and horror because I'm already so wicked on the outside," I said, rising to the bait. "What would I tell? Maybe a pretty little love story?" Charles was snorting like a walrus now. He was tipsier than I liked him, so I chose to simply address Jimmy, who after all was a friend in need. Besides, I had just what the doctor ordered. As you recall, though, if you read the entire book by Mary Shelley, the thought even the monster needed love. She thought even the monster needed love and bade Dr. Frankenstein create him a mate, I said thoughtfully. Mary wanted to deliver a moral lesson that man shouldn't meddle with the laws of God. But we know there isn't any God, don't we? And what if this new woman made out of death didn't love, couldn't love? A man, after all, always expects a woman to love him. I've never understood why a man is so surprised when I don't. Jimmy took a long puff of his cigar. Even in the dim light, I could discern the first look of excitement I'd seen in him all evening. The mad movie director was alive again. "Like Mary, you have a story to tell me, don't you, Elsa?" he said, perching on the arm of my chair. "Elsa is quite the storyteller," Charles said. "You can never believe a word she says unless it's about somebody else." "Shush, Charles," Jimmy said, swatting his hand in the direction of my husband with such force that Charles did something he rarely did. "Shut up." Then Jimmy turned back to me. "I'm all ears." Thunder clapped outside. "All right then, chaps. Let me tell you a story. A story where there are no gods, but there are monsters." Then Elsa tells her story. We go back to, all I'm going to say is we go back to 1923. She's 20 years old, living a carefree dream of singing and dancing, and my first real notice as an actress, playing the small but crucial role of the larva at the London premiere of the insect play by that acclaimed playwriting pair of Czech brothers, Karol and Joseph Kapek. And she's dating a white Russian. And you'll have to read the rest of the story to find out what happens.
Thanks, folks. Anya Martin, everybody. So before I introduce our next reader, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the other people that are in this book. And I'm just going to throw a few names and titles at you. The folks that couldn't be here, as I try to do this one-handed. So, hey, Jay, hold Ellie. All right. So, like I said, Amber's story opens up the collection. The second story in the book is one called Thermidor by Simone Carroll. It's wonderful. Actually stumbled onto Simone's work because another editor sent me a story by her and said, well, what do you think of this? And I said, I think enough of this that I'm going to send her an email and say, hey, you want to send me a Frankenstein story? The next story is Sewn Into Her Fingers by Autumn Christian. She's a really talented author, has a book called Ecstatic, oh geez, I'm going to blow this. Ecstatic Tornado, I want to say.
Inferno.
Thank you. Ecstatic Inferno. She's really good, and I think if you keep your ear to the ground, you will hear a lot from her. Orchids by the Sea by Rios de la Luz, amazingly talented author. The Frankenstein Triptych by Edward Morris. I've had stories by Ed in one of the books of Cthulhu and my Jack the Ripper anthology, and I think he's one of the most talented authors out there. Michael Griffin's The Human Alchemy. I published Michael's collection, Lure of Devouring Light, earlier this year, and I think this is one of his best stories. Betty Rocksteady with Postpartum. Betty has a story called Arachnophile, about a woman who falls in love with a spider. It is a bizarro book, and it is, yeah, I saw that shutter back there. Yeah, the whole book is that shutter. It's wonderful. Scott R. Jones' story Living is in the book. Scott Jones does a lot of cover design work for me, and he runs the Canadian micropress, Martian Migraine Press. Big shout out to Scott. He is just a great guy. Tiffany Scandals, They Call Me Monster. This is one of the stories that got cited by Publishers Weekly in their review. Tiffany is really just a talented author. She's got a new book coming out called Shit Luck, and I'm really looking forward to reading that one. Sugar and Spice and Everything Nice by Damian Angelica Walters. Damian is just a presence, and she is quite a talented author, well worth seeking out. Oren Gray, I published Oren's collection, Painted Monsters and Other Strange Beasts, last year. I've worked with him on multiple anthologies. His story is called Baron von Werewolf Presents Frankenstein Against the Phantom Planet. And I have to admit, the title is not the best part of the story, but for anybody that grew up as a monster kid watching monster movies on Saturday afternoons on TV, there is something in that story that will touch your heart and then kind of twist it a little bit. Nathan Carson, who was here about a week ago, and he's the author of a new novella called Star Creek that we premiered here. He's got a story in here that stars Nikola Tesla, and it's called Wither on the Vine, or Strict-Fattened Monster. Anya Martin, of course. G.D. Faulkson, he's a steampunk author and really good. Transatlantic Conspiracy is his new one, really recommended. He's got a story in here called The New Soviet Man. And then Christy DeMeester, The Beautiful Thing We Will Become. I've got a novel by Christy coming out in February next year. It is called Beneath. It's got snake handling religious cults and all sorts of weirdness, and I'm eager to show that one off to you, but you're gonna have to wait for February. And then finally, closing out the anthology is this next author. And when I got up here as somebody who wrote and was looking for venues to get my own stories out there, this author took a chance on me because he had a showcase called Page on Stage that he was doing, and they produced a handful of my stories for radio, and it was really cool seeing them live and seeing them, hearing them on the radio. So let me introduce to you David Templeton. There
are sporadic seats, two down here. A few people standing want to take a seat. This would be a good time. My story, Mary Shelley's Body. I don't need this, but I'll use it a little bit. It's a ghost story. This is Mary Shelley's life as told by her ghost. I came up with that idea completely by accident. I really just wanted to retell Frankenstein's story in a certain way, and then I started reading about Mary Shelley's life, and I became moderately obsessed with it. So suddenly, out of the blue, I started hearing Mary Shelley's voice. So here I am, a 50-something-year-old guy writing in the voice of one of the most famous women in the world. That was scary, but it is a murder story. So this is how my piece begins. It's a novella-length piece. It's the longest one in the collection, I believe. And thank you, Russ, for putting it in here. This has been a really fun thing to be a part of this production. I cannot breathe. Oh God, I cannot breathe. There's thunder in my lungs, a whirlwind in my throat, bolts of lightning stabbing at my heart, shredding my flesh, shredding my soul like paper. I feel as thin as paper. I am burning. I try to breathe, but all I sense in my chest are those buzzing arcs of light, spreading out like veins of fire through my skin. And still I cannot breathe. I wonder, should I stop trying? I stop. There is a faint, faraway exhalation, as if from behind a dark, wet door. I let myself hear it, the sound of it evaporating. It is an empty sound, as shallow and void as my body, my poor, sick, wrecked, half-paralyzed, once desirable, once fearless, once unstoppable body. Ah, I begin to understand. As suddenly and certainly as those flashes of light, I still see somewhere beyond what used to be my eyes. I see the truth now. I no longer need to breathe. I am done with breathing. I am dead. Well, great God, that took long enough. The doctors are no doubt relieved to be rid of me, the crazy lady from London, wasting away with no obvious cause. For months, for years, there has been only a sense that something was wrong in the spongy muscle of my brain, something vital added or taken away. And now my life, my little life, is over. My hapless heart, so long deluged in bitterness, is finally still. I feel so much better now. My head no longer hurts, for one thing, and that terrible burning smell like wet feathers set ablaze, that's gone too. How long has it been since it all began? The smell, the headaches, the fainting spells, then the failure of half my body to obey the simplest task. No matter, I am free of it now. Free of my body, free of my life. This then, I surmise, is my grave. This slab of cold carved stone I sense before me, after years of loneliness, is my lonely gray tomb. I cannot see, but I do perceive shapes and structures all around. I cannot feel, but I detect words here, carved onto the rock slab before which I stand. How am I standing? My body, what is left of it, lies there in the grave. Yet here I am, standing, kneeling even, speaking, if speaking this is. Had I fingers with which to feel, I would caress these carved words, trace out their meaning with my fingertips. And yet, somehow, I can. Somehow I do. I can read the meaning of these etched lines. Here lies Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Yes, that was I, Mary, a wife, a mother, an author. Daughter of William and Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. Those were my parents, yes, though he too much so, and she, dead almost upon looking at me, only my mother in that she conceived me, bore me, and birthed me. And still, in so many ways, Mary Wollstonecraft, the writer, the radical, beloved and despised by so many, gave me more with her life and words than my father, with his calm and silent disapproval, ever gave me with his. The next line, widow of the late Percy Bysshe Shelley. Shelley, oh Shelley, my husband, my love, my savior, my only one. I have no beating heart to ache with, no sense to feel with. How then does your name still serve me so? Almost 30 years have passed since you died, your soul set free beneath the waters of the Gulf of Spezzia, your drowned body, with its speaking eyes and face unlike any other who ever walked earth, burned to gray ashes on the shore. Since that day, oh my love, I have missed you so, with only your memory to comfort me these many years. That, and the singular divinity of your poems. And, oh yes, I have had your heart. It's still in my desk. Your friend Trelawney snatched it, charred and purple, from your funeral pyre. Your heart, dried and flattened, sits in my desk still, tucked away beneath my papers, along with 3 locks of hair, one from each of our 3 dead children. I wonder who will discover them there in the drawer. I suspect it will be our daughter-in-law, Jane. It'll give her a bit of a shock, that. A final line. Born August 30, 1797. Died February 1, 1851. Odd. I feel as if I have only just died, but I am already buried. That was quickly done. I suspect it was Jane's doing. Ever since she married my dear Percy Florence, that daughter-in-law of mine, whom I have loved with as much of my own heart as was left to love with, has proven anything if not punctual. But then, of course, she has had years to plan. I have been dying for such a very long time. And now I am dead. I must be, for there is my name on this tomb. Shelley used to joke that if I died before he would see to it that my marker proclaimed, "Here lies the body of Anonymous." It was a joke, but it came with a sting. Anonymous was the name under which my first novel was published. Afterwards followed years of ungenerous assumptions that another must have been the true author of my story, that I was not capable of it. Visitors to our house, when engaged in conversation with Shelley, oft interpreted my watchful silence as dullness, and whispered rumors that my husband likely wrote more of the prose than I. Shelley defended me. After that, I saw to it that all of my subsequent works were published, if not always under my true name, then at least under a title which made my authorship clear. For the rest of my days, all my published writing proclaimed, by the author of Frankenstein. Frankenstein. My first great success, born of happier days, too briefly tasted. Frankenstein. My triumph, my curse, my hideous progeny. Throw in one other little snippet. I'm not sure if Jay is here. I have some Easter eggs in here. As I was writing this, sitting at the bar at Graffiti Restaurant down the street, and the bartenders there became very interested in what I was doing, and they were really supportive of it. And when I started to describe the graveyard that Mary wanders around in through the course of this story, remembering her life, I started needing names on the tombstones, so I just started picking the bartenders' names. And so quite a few of them are inserted in here. And one of them that I thought was just kind of fun, she's wandering around looking at the tombstones to kind of break up the story. It gets very emotional for her. And she says, speaking of which, here's a lovely little crypt surrounded by stone lions. Here lies Captain Jason Van Leer, born 1757, died 1806, sailor, father, husband, and poet. Love never fails. Ah, my dear Captain, would that that were so. But love, I have found, almost always fails. Shelley, my own husband and poet, was a great believer in love. He certainly fell in it often enough, and with so many different women. So that was Captain Jason Van Leer. Is actually J. Van Leer. That's his real name, and it's just a name that really belongs on a tombstone. As he had said, don't worry, someday it will. Thank you.
David Templeton, ladies and gents. In a few moments, I'm going to bring our authors up here, and we're going to kind of field your questions for a few minutes, and then we're happy to sign copies of the book. Please, if you enjoy what you've heard, pick up a copy of the book. You're happy to sell you one up front. It helps me pay authors like these guys, so it would be awesome. I've got 4 thank yous I really want to throw out here right now. First, thank you, my wife, Jennifer Lockhart. Second, Copperfield Books for hosting us. And third, all of you for showing up. Thank you for making this possible. And fourth, we are live streaming this on Facebook, so anybody that's tuned in, thank you for tuning in. Once again, Amber Rose Green, Anya Martin, and David Templeton. Any questions? Are you guys going to make this easy? Yes.
Bella wanted to know if Trelawney was a real person
Yes.
in Shelley's lifetime. Okay, so
Yeah, all of the facts, until it turns supernatural and twisty in my story, are all things that I came up with in the research. Trelawney, he was sort of an adventurer type. He, after Shelley died, her husband, he proposed to her many times, but she never accepted.
did he have a daughter named Sybil?
I do not believe so.
Questions?
David, what was Shelley's fate? You hinted at it in keeping his heart.
Percy Shelley, the poet,
Yeah.
he drowned. He was probably having an affair with somebody. It was after they'd gone through a whole lot of turmoil. They'd lost 3 children. She had just had a miscarriage and lost her 4th. He narrowly saved her life, actually. She was bleeding profusely, and he put her in a tub of ice and stopped the bleeding until the surgeon could get there. 10 days later, he was sailing back from this possible clandestine affair when his boat turned upside down, and he drowned. He was found a few days later. The only way they knew for certain it was him, because the fish and the water weren't very kind to him, was his pockets were packed with books of poetry. Yeah.
Is drowning the most romantic way to die?
I don't know, that's not consumption hell.
Only if you have pockets full of poetry.
Percy's wife, he was actually married when he met Mary Shelley, Harriet. She eventually drowned herself in a park where she wasn't the only one. A lot of tragic women went there to drown themselves. The boaters were beginning to complain.
But the fish were well fed.
The fish loved it.
Other questions? Yeah.
These are your anthologies, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Do you just come up with a night, like you mentioned the Jack the Ripper anthology, now Frankenstein. And how do you find your authors? I mean, I know that you met David, you said, with the page on stage. But how do you find your authors?
I read a lot. And I don't just read what's on the bestseller list and that sort of thing. I read a lot of chapbooks, I read a lot of anthologies, I read a lot of websites, and I'm constantly looking for interesting authors that I want to work with. And so I kind of have a shopping list that I go through, and when I'm putting together an anthology, I basically write down a big list of names and I send out invites, and the ones that get back to me are awesome to work with, and the ones that don't, well, people get busy. But this is my 7th anthology. I did Book of Cthulhu 2 for another publisher, and then when I started Word Horde, I started it with Tales of Jack the Ripper. My 2nd anthology with Word Horde was Giallo Fantastique, which pays tribute to Italian horror movies and is very colorful and very exciting and very weird.
It's a great book.
And then Cthulhu Fatagan, and which was last year, And that was awarded the This Is Horror Anthology of the Year, which really just made my year last year. And then back in there somewhere is The Children Won't Leech, which was a tribute to an author named Leonard Barron, and we brought together all sorts of fun people. Myself and my co-author, Justin Steele. And that's a really fun one. That got nominated for the Shirley Jackson Award.
What inspired you to choose Frankenstein as a topic?
Well, I have been obsessed with Frankenstein since I was about 8 years old, and my mom turned on the TV one Saturday afternoon and said, "Oh, you're gonna like these." And we watched The Bride of Frankenstein and probably Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I was hooked. Turned me into a monster kid. I started trying to make movies in the backyard and had glow-in-the-dark models of Frankenstein and the Wolfman and Dracula lined up in my closet. Of course, I had to shut the closet door at night because they glowed. But it is such an influential story, and I also saw this as the book where I wanted more women in it than men. And that was my goal going in, and hey, well, I did it. And I'm really happy with the way it turned out because there are just some wonderful authors on it. Yes?
I actually have two questions. First, for Anya, what drew you to that period in Hollywood? Like, why did you want to set it there? And the question for Amber is, were there any parts that you cut out of the story in terms of editing that you wanted to kind of add, but maybe set it against them?
Okay. Should I get closer to the mic so it isn't all that loud?
Yeah.
I actually just set out when you read a story about Elsa Lanchester. I kind of just thought she would be a really interesting character, and I had no idea what story I was going to write. I just was like, I wanted to write something that went around, that had to do with the bride and so forth. And how did we end up sort of at the period, well, it starts in that 1932. I needed a place, I looked to create a parallel to the beginning of Bride of Frankenstein. And I looked into the history of when all three of them were in Hollywood, how it got them there, and when James Whale was working on trying to decide whether he was going to make a sequel to Frankenstein, and there was a lot of pressure to do so. So that kind of determined the date, pretty much, that it had to be around 1932. And then I looked to see where she lived, because there was a period where Charles was there without her too, so I had to find that sweet spot. And then once I knew it was 1932, I knew from her autobiography, which I highly recommend reading, Elsa Lanchester herself, I knew that the details of where she lived, etc., at the time and what house they were in. And then 1923 was a somewhat arbitrary choice, but really once I found out that she was working on that play, I was like, anyone who appreciates Specklet knows about the Capet brothers. So, well, not anyone, but some people do. So I was like, okay, it has to be now. And at that time, it turned out she was dating a white Russian. And that worked into the story as well. So it just seemed like the perfect time, and then the story began to write itself. There's a lot of real things from her life in that story, such as the references to the frog, the electroshock parties, some of the other things, her mother. There's a lot of actual history, 1917 Club also in that story.
So I started with the heart and the head, and I knew that I wanted to do those. And I actually was going to split off the hands from the arms, and it was going to be hands, arms, torso, heart, head when I came up with the idea for doing more than just two. But then I realized, I started writing the one about the arms, and I realized it was a fist fight. So I figured that you probably should stay with the hands. So no deleted scenes. It really started with the heart and the head, and that the contrast between the two.
The tones were really different between them. Did you find you had a hard time with one of them in particular? Or did they all just kind of come out?
No, actually, this is, I guess, not an Easter egg, but my reference is the heart and the head actually are modeled specifically on two different works of literature. The head is modeled after the style of the Love Song of Geoffrey Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. And then the heart is The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe. And I had read The Sorrows of Young Werther pretty recently before I wrote the story. And then I was fascinated by, again, those two. I mean, they're both deep like love stories, and they have such different tones. And so I was playing with that. So it is distinctly modeled after those two styles.
Young Werther was actually one of the books, you probably know this, that Shelley and Mary and her stepsister Claire were reading when they ran away the first time to France. They brought all these books with them, and that was one that was on the list.
I didn't know that until like after and then I found it after I'd written the story, and I was like, oh, that's funny.
Well, actually, I have a question for you. I want to know how you came up with that idea, because one of the things in my story, Mary starts to tell bits that she left out of the book, including her backstories for the brain, the heart, the hands, and the blood. And that's actually what originally, that was my first idea that led me into the whole thing. So I'm curious how you were inspired.
I had started to write something entirely different for this. I was doing this whole like immortality, electricity thing, and it just wasn't working. And then I started another thing, and and I actually was texting with a friend who's in the audience, my friend Ricky, and he was like, "What about body parts?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, body parts!" And I wrote the beginning, or the two end parts that were the beginning of my adventure into the story. And then he was like, "And what about this?" And I was like, "No, it's already done. I already did it." But so he actually gave me the idea. So he stole your idea.
Nobody stole anybody's idea. I think it's cool that the book is bookended with stories that have that similarity.
I love that.
It's almost like somebody said, "Hey, that'll work."
Yeah.
Like maybe there was an editor who actually decided
That's
to
crazy.
do that.
Ross, I thought this was random. You don't do it random.
You know, I know people that do. Don't get me started. Or alphabetically. That just drives me nuts.
I have a question
Yeah.
for Ross. When you finished this, did you shout, "It's alive"?
It's alive! Alive!
Just one.
That's what he signs when he signs it.
Yeah. Which is funny, because in James Whale's Frankenstein, it's not "it's alive, it's alive," it's alive, 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 alive. And he just goes on with that for a while. And then Bride of Frankenstein, it's the "she's alive." So, you know, we always misremember these lines from movies. And, something about the collective unconsciousness. Any other questions? Yeah.
I think Ross already answered this question, but I'm curious what each of yours favorite or most, poignant Frankenstein reference or thing, movie, book, whatever that you guys each have.
Like as an inspiration?
No, what your Ross.
What's your favorite Frankenstein?
Yeah.
There are so many. Young Frankenstein certainly, but most recently, there's Mr. J. Van Leer, who's the tombstone of the story. Most recently, the Frankenstein creatures in the miniseries Penny Dreadful have been really moving.
Anya?
That's like an impossible question, because there are too many great Frankensteins, and of course, the original book, Young Frankenstein, as she said, The Bride, all of these are going to have affection for me. I will say that, as a child, Frankenstein, the True Story, the TV movie, was like an epiphanal viewing. And it was, I don't know, I haven't rewatched it in recent years, so I don't know if it holds up, but it was a different, the first stab at really trying to tell the story as Mary Shelley did, I think. And that was, it has a sweet spot for me.
Aside from the book is its own thing. Everything else is so different. Everybody takes their own version of it. I really loved recently, they did a play in London, directed by Danny Boyle. And that actually was amazing. It was really, they do live streams of it. They're not live anymore, but they did do a live stream of it. And so I got to see one, there are two versions, I got to see both versions, which was really, really awesome. It was just a whole new interpretation of it. It was beautiful on to watch on stage, even if I wasn't actually watching it on stage.
Now, I'm a huge Boris Karloff fan, but I have this fascination with Charles Ogle's performance as the monster in the Edison Frankenstein, which was considered a lost film for many years. And I had only seen stills until somebody released it onto the internet just a couple of years ago, because they had found a print of it. And it really is a treat. It's about 15 minutes long, jerky, jumpy, silent movie that really does get the heart of Mary Shelley's story. Although, like any other film adaptation of it, never quite gets it exactly right. But it is well worth tracking down.
Mad Monster Party is another.
Ooh! Dang!
And Frankenberry.
How about Andy Warhol's Frankenstein?
Now, sometimes you just have to take life by the gallbladder.
That's right.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Amber. Amber.
Yes, yes.
You wrote in the second person, correct? And I found that to be really interesting and jarring. And these two were in first person, I believe. Yes, how you wrote. And it's so rare to me to find that. And I was just wondering about your decision to write in that style and how different and jarring it was. I don't know, to me.
I was going for, because since it is about the body parts that made up the creature himself, I was going for almost that they were telling the story to him, so about himself. So the you in all cases, even though they're different voices, is really parts of the creature. So it's the you is him, but split and brought back together. So that's, and I don't know if I consciously made that decision. I started writing and it was second person. I don't know. The aborted 3 other stories that I started were all third person, which is what I usually write in. I don't usually write in the second person, so it was a departure for me as well.
It's a tough POV to write in, and I'm a big fan of it. One of the novels I published last year was Nicole Cushing's Mr. Suicide, which is written in the second person and went on to win the Bram Stoker Award for Best First Novel. And my own novel, Chick Bassist, is about 1/3 written in second person, so I was very receptive to it. I think there's an honesty to it that really kind of nails the emotions, and so when it's done right, it's wonderful. When it's done wrong, it feels like a choose your own adventure novel.
Chick Basis is really what he does with point of view in Chick Basis, which we have over there in fiction under Lockhart. It's really cool. I love what he does with point of view in that.
And actually, I have some second person in Mary Shelley's body. When she starts to relate the story of the creature, she slips into second person and starts saying you. So there's another bookending kind of part to it.
Are you guys really secretly twins?
They are now.
Yeah.
They're bookends.
One of the reasons I like doing anthologies is you get to take different ideas and different authors that can be, from the same town or from completely different parts of the world, and you put their stories in conversation with one another. And so I very deliberately layer things in a way where everything kind of builds along and everything feels like it's interacting. And, most people out there, they pick and choose at anthologies. They don't read it cover to cover, but I do view it as a ride, and I want you to enjoy that ride. So,
if you're going to read this out of order, the 2 you should read back to back is They Call Me Monsters first, right? And then Sugar and Spice and Everything Nice, and you really have to read them together. So he says you can read it out of order. I say you can't with those 2.
Though then you could jump to The Beautiful Thing We Shall Become, which fits in.
Yeah.
There too.
Yes. So you don't skip there and then skip after.
oh, just read the whole book. Any other questions? Okay, so this is a party. There are treats over there. Please help yourself.
Frankenstein cupcakes.
Awesome Frankenstein cupcakes.
Oh, I have a question
Yeah.
before we end. And so, When did it switch from yellow skin to green skin? Is there a moment in the Frankenstein oeuvre wherein it switches?
You know, I think a lot of that has to do with the Jack Pierce makeup, which was kind of sallow and greenish.
So it was black and white.
Yeah, even though it was in black and white, but you look at that actual makeup. But it's like a lot of things. If it looks good on screen, movie people are going to put it on the screen. And if you want to get that idea of weird alien dead flesh apart, well, green just hits something in the human psyche.
Yellow doesn't look good on cupcakes either, so it's green.
Thank you, everybody. Again, help yourselves.